I never thought I would spend $3,000 defending my right to put sand on my own driveway. But here I was, sitting in a lawyer's office in Burlington, Vermont, because the Ridgeview Estates Homeowners Association decided that my choice of winter ice prevention was somehow destroying the entire neighborhood. My name is Nathan Irving, and I had lived in Ridgeview Estates for exactly 2 winters before this nightmare began. The subdivision was one of those newer developments that sprouted up on the outskirts of Burlington, where cookie sea-cutter colonials sat on quarter-acre lots, and every mailbox looked identical. I bought the house after my divorce, thinking a fresh start in a quiet neighborhood would be exactly what I needed. The HOA seemed reasonable enough when I moved in. Sure, they had rules about lawn height and fence colors, but nothing that seemed too invasive. I should have known better. The trouble started in late November when the first real cold snap hit Vermont. I was working as a software engineer for a tech startup downtown, which meant early mornings and late nights. The last thing I wanted to deal with was a slip-and-fall lawsuit because my driveway turned into an ice rink. So I did what any reasonable homeowner would do. I went to the hardware store and bought a bag of ice melt. I had just finished spreading the pellets across my driveway when my doorbell rang. It was 7 in the morning, and I was still in my pajamas with a coffee cup in one hand. Through the frosted glass, I could see a woman standing on my porch with a clipboard. My stomach dropped. Nothing good ever comes from someone with a clipboard at 7 in the morning. I opened the door to find Patricia Hendricks, the HOA president, standing there with a smile that did not reach her eyes. She was in her late 40s with blonde hair cut in that specific style that seemed to be required for all HOA board members. You know the one. I had met her briefly at the closing, where she had handed me a thick binder of HOA rules and regulations that I had honestly never read cover to cover. "Good morning, Nathan," she said in that sickly sweet voice that immediately put me on edge. "I hope I am not catching you at a bad time." "It's 7 in the morning, Patricia," I said, not bothering to hide my annoyance. "What can I do for you?" She glanced down at my driveway, then back at me with a look of disappointment. "I noticed you have been using traditional ice melt on your driveway. I am afraid that is not in compliance with our new environmental guidelines." I blinked at her. "What environmental guidelines?" Patricia flipped through the papers on her clipboard with theatrical precision. "The HOA board voted last month to implement eco-friendly requirements for all winter maintenance products. Traditional ice melt contains chemicals that can harm local waterways and vegetation. We require all residents to use only approved eco-friendly alternatives." "I never got a notice about this," I said, feeling the first stirrings of anger in my chest. "The notice was sent via email to all residents on October 15th, she replied smoothly. "It is your responsibility to stay informed about HOA communications." I wanted to argue, but I also wanted to finish my coffee and get ready for work. "Fine. What am I supposed to use instead?" Patricia handed me a photocopied sheet from her clipboard. "Here is a list of approved eco-friendly ice melting products. They are available at most major retailers. I will need you to remove the traditional ice melt from your driveway and switch to an approved product within 48 hours, or we will have to issue a fine." She turned on her heel and walked away before I could respond, leaving me standing in my doorway holding a piece of paper and wondering what I had gotten myself into. That night, I drove to 3 different stores looking for the products on Patricia's approved list. The first 2 did not carry any of them. The third, a specialty organic home goods store in downtown Burlington, had exactly one option in stock. It was called Eco Thaw Plus, and it cost $65 for a 10-pound bag. The regular ice melt I had been using cost $12 for 20 pounds. I stared at the price tag, then at the tiny bag, and did some quick mental math. My driveway was about 40 feet long and 12 feet wide. I would need at least 4 of these bags to adequately cover it for a single application. That was $260, and winter in Vermont lasted at least 5 months. I would be spending over $1,000 just to keep my driveway safe. Back in my car, I called my buddy Marcus, who lived in the same subdivision. "Did you get this crazy email about eco-friendly ice melt?" "Oh yeah," Marcus said. "I ignored it. They cannot really enforce that, can they?" "Patricia was at my door at 7 this morning saying they will fine me if I do not switch." Marcus laughed. "Of course she was. That woman has nothing better to do than harass people. Just use whatever you want. What are they going to do, send the ice melt police?" But I knew Patricia would follow through on her threat. I had seen her type before, the kind of person who got a small amount of power and wielded it like a weapon. So I did what any reasonable person would do when faced with an unreasonable demand. I looked for a loophole. I spent the next evening researching ice prevention methods on my laptop. Traditional salt and ice melt were out because of Patricia's rules. The eco-friendly alternatives were prohibitively expensive. But then I stumbled across an article about alternative methods of winter traction, and that is when I found it. Sand. Sand was completely natural, environmentally friendly, and most importantly, not on the list of prohibited substances. It did not melt ice like salt, but it provided excellent traction on icy surfaces. And the best part, a 50-pound bag cost $5 at the hardware store. The next morning, I went to Henderson's Hardware on North Avenue and bought 10 bags of playground sand. The kid working the register gave me a weird look, but did not ask questions. I loaded them into my trunk and drove home feeling pretty pleased with myself. That weekend, when the temperature dropped and freezing rain coated everything in a layer of ice, I went out and spread sand all over my driveway. It worked perfectly. My car had plenty of traction, and I could walk from my garage to the mailbox without risking a broken hip. I even spread some on my front walkway for good measure. 2 days later, Patricia was back at my door. This time it was 6:30 in the evening, and I had just gotten home from work. "Nathan," she said, and her voice had lost all pretense of sweetness, "we need to talk about your driveway." "What about it?" I asked innocently. "You are using sand. That is completely unacceptable." I pulled out my phone and opened the photo I had taken of her approved products list. "Sand is not on the prohibited list. You said I had to stop using traditional ice melt, and I did. I am using sand, which is completely natural and environmentally friendly." Her face turned a shade of red that probably was not healthy. "The intent of the rule was clear. We want driveways to be maintained without harmful runoff." "Sand is not harmful runoff," I said. "It is literally just crushed rock. It is natural. It is organic. It is probably more eco-friendly than anything on your approved list." "This is not what we intended," she sputtered. "Then maybe you should have been more specific with your rules," I said, and closed the door. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The next week, I received a formal letter from the HOA. It was sent via certified mail, which meant I had to sign for it at the post office. The letter informed me that I was in violation of Section 4.7 of the HOA covenants regarding property maintenance and aesthetic standards. Apparently, the sand on my driveway was creating an unsightly appearance and needed to be removed immediately. I read the letter 3 times, each time getting angrier. They were changing their argument because the environmental angle had not worked. Now they were saying the sand looked bad. Never mind that half the driveways in the neighborhood had streaks of white salt residue all over them. Never mind that my driveway was actually safer than most. The sand looked unsightly. I called the HOA management office and asked to speak to Patricia. The receptionist told me she was unavailable but would return my call within 48 hours. 3 days later, I still had not heard back, so I went to the HOA office in person. The office was located in a small commercial building off Shelburne Road, sandwiched between a dentist and a tax preparation service. I walked in and found Patricia sitting behind a desk, typing on her computer. "We need to talk," I said. She looked up with that same fake smile. "Nathan, I was just about to call you back." "Sure you were. I want to know what legal basis you have for telling me I cannot use sand on my driveway." As the letter stated, it is an aesthetic violation. Half the neighborhood has salt stains all over their driveways. Are you finding all of them too? Salt stains are temporary and wash away with rain. Your sand is creating a permanent mess. It is not permanent. I can sweep it up anytime I want. But right now, it is keeping my driveway safe during winter weather. Patricia folded her hands on her desk. "Nathan, I understand you are frustrated, but the HOA has the authority to enforce aesthetic standards. That is what you agreed to when you purchased your home." "I agreed to reasonable standards. This is not reasonable. If you continue to refuse compliance, we will have no choice but to levy fines. $50 per day until the violation is corrected." I could not believe what I was hearing. $50 a day for using sand on my own driveway. Those are the standard fines for non-compliance. I left the office shaking with anger. $50 a day. That was $350 a week, over $1,000 a month. For sand. That night, I did something I probably should have done months ago. I actually read the entire HOA covenant document. All 73 pages of it. Most of it was the standard stuff about lawn maintenance and architectural approval for modifications. But then, I found section 4.7, the one they were using to threaten me with fines. The section said that all properties must be maintained in a neat and orderly appearance consistent with the community standards. It went on to list specific violations like abandoned vehicles, excessive lawn ornaments, and peeling paint. Nowhere did it mention sand or ice melt or winter maintenance materials. I also found something interesting in Section 9.3, which covered the HOA board's authority. It specifically stated that the board could not implement new rules or regulations without a vote of the general membership. At least 51% of homeowners had to approve any changes to the covenants. The next morning, I sent an email to Patricia with a simple question. "Can you please provide documentation showing that the eco-friendly ice melt requirement was approved by a vote of the general membership, as required by Section 9.3 of the HOA covenants?" She responded within an hour. The board has the authority to implement environmental guidelines without a general vote under our discretionary powers. I read the email twice, then wrote back. Section 9.3 does not provide any exception for environmental guidelines. All covenant changes require a member vote. Without documentation of a proper vote, this requirement is not enforceable. She did not respond, but 2 days later I got another certified letter. This one informed me that I was being fined $50 per day starting immediately for the aesthetic violation, and that the HOA would be placing a lien on my property if the fines were not paid within 30 days. That is when I called a lawyer. The attorney's name was David Chen, and his office was in a renovated Victorian house on Main Street in Burlington. I had found him through an online search for HOA attorneys Vermont, and his reviews were excellent. His consultation fee was $200, which seemed like a bargain compared to the fines Patricia was threatening. I sat in his office and explained the entire situation, from the ice melt requirements to the sand to the threats of daily fines. David listened carefully, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and smiled. "This is one of the more ridiculous HOA cases I have seen this year, and I have seen some doozies. So you think I have a case?" "Oh, absolutely. First of all, they cannot implement new covenant requirements without a member vote. That alone makes their eco-friendly ice melt rule unenforceable. Second, even if they could enforce aesthetic standards, sand on a driveway during winter is completely reasonable maintenance. No court is going to side with them on that." Relief washed over me. "So what do? I will send them a letter explaining that their fines are not enforceable and demanding they cease all collection activities. If they continue, we can file for a temporary restraining order and sue for harassment." "How much is this going to cost me?" David tapped his pen on the desk. "If they back down after my letter, just the cost of the letter, maybe $500. If we have to go to court, it could be anywhere from $3,000 to $10,000 depending on how hard they fight." I thought about the $50 a day in fines. "Send the letter." David drafted a strongly worded letter citing multiple violations of the HOA's own covenants and the Vermont Property Owners Association Act. He sent it via certified mail and emailed me a copy. The letter concluded with a demand that the HOA immediately cease all fine collection activities and rescind the eco-friendly ice melt requirement. I waited for a response. Days went by with nothing. Then a week. I was starting to think maybe Patricia had realized she was in the wrong and was going to drop the whole thing. Then the storm hit. It was early December, and Vermont got slammed with a major nor'easter. 12 inches of snow followed by freezing rain, the kind of weather that turns roads into ice rinks and knocks out power lines. I spent the first morning after the storm shoveling my driveway and spreading sand for traction. The sand worked beautifully, giving me plenty of grip to get my car in and out without sliding. Around noon, my doorbell rang. It was Marcus from down the street, looking frantic. "Dude, you need to see this," he said. I grabbed my coat and followed him outside. We walked down the street to where it intersected with Ridgeview Drive, the main road through the subdivision. A crowd of neighbors had gathered, and I could see Patricia and 2 other HOA board members standing near a storm drain. As we got closer, I could see the problem. The storm drain was completely clogged and water was backing up into the street. But it was not just water. Mixed in with the slush and melting snow was sand. A lot of sand. Patricia spotted me immediately. "Nathan," she shouted, pointing an accusing finger. "Look what you have done." I walked over and looked at the clogged drain. Sure enough, there was sand in it. But there was also leaves, sticks, dirt, road salt, and general debris. "What am I looking at? Your sand has clogged the drainage system. Water is backing up into people's yards." I looked around. She was right that water was backing up, but it was not exactly flooding anyone's property. It was just pooling in the street, which was pretty normal after a major storm. "How do you know that is my sand?" I asked. "You are the only person using sand," she practically screamed. "Actually," said Mr. Wagner, an elderly man who lived 2 houses down from me, "I have been using sand too. Saw Nathan doing it and thought it was a smart idea. That eco-friendly stuff you recommended did not work worth a damn." "Me too," said a woman I recognized but did not know by name. "I've been putting sand down for years. Long before this, HOA got all worked up about ice melt. Patricia's face was turning that unhealthy shade of red again. Regardless of who is using it, the sand is clogging our drainage system and it needs to stop. The drain is clogged because of the storm, I said calmly. There is a ton of debris in there. Some of it might be sand, but sand does not just spontaneously clog drains. This is what happens after major weather events. The drainage company says it is definitely sand causing the blockage, Patricia insisted. What drainage company? I asked. She waved her hand dismissively. The company the HOA uses for maintenance. They were out here this morning and confirmed it is sand. I would like to see their report, I said. You do not have the right to see HOA maintenance reports. Actually, as a homeowner, I have the right to see any HOA financial or maintenance records. It is in Section 8.2 of the covenants. Patricia glared at me. Fine. You can request them through the proper channels. In the meantime, you need to stop using sand immediately. No, I said simply, and walked back to my house. That evening, I got a call from David Chen. I just received a very interesting voicemail from the HOA's attorney. They have an attorney. Apparently, yes. A guy named Ronald Stevens. He is asking if we are willing to mediate this dispute. What does that mean? It means they want to negotiate a settlement without going to court, which is good for you because it means they know they are on weak legal ground. What kind of settlement? That is what we would discuss in mediation. But typically it means you would agree to stop using sand and they would agree to waive the fines. I thought about it. What if I do not want to stop using sand? It works, it is cheap, and I am not breaking any rules. David chuckled. Then we go to mediation and tell them that. Let them make the first offer. Maybe they will surprise us. The mediation was scheduled for a week later at a neutral location, a conference room in a downtown office building. I took a half-day off work to attend. David met me in the lobby and we rode the elevator up together. Just remember, he said, do not agree to anything unless you are completely comfortable with it. This is your home, and you have the right to maintain it however you see fit within reason. Patricia was already in the conference room with Ronald Stevens, a portly man in his 50s wearing an expensive suit. The mediator was a woman named Barbara Collins, who explained that her role was to facilitate discussion and help us reach a mutually agreeable solution. We all sat down at the conference table, and Barbara started by asking each side to present their position. Ronald went first. The HOA's position is simple, he said. Mr. Irving's use of sand is causing property damage to the community drainage system. The cost to repair this damage is estimated at $15,000. We are asking that Mr. Irving cease using sand immediately and contribute to the repair costs. I almost fell out of my chair. $15,000. For what? Ronald slid a document across the table. This is an estimate from Summit Drainage Solutions. They need to excavate and clean out 3 storm drains that have been clogged with sand. David picked up the document and read it carefully. This estimate is dated 2 days after the nor'easter. How can you possibly attribute this damage solely to sand when the entire region was hit with a major storm that deposited debris everywhere? The drainage company specifically identified sand as the primary clog material, Ronald said. May we see their actual inspection report? David asked. Not just the estimate, but the detailed findings. Ronald shuffled through his papers. I do not have that with me. Then how do we know sand is actually the problem? David pressed. The mediation went on like this for 2 hours. Ronald kept insisting that sand was destroying the drainage system. David kept poking holes in their evidence and pointing out that they had no legal basis for prohibiting sand in the first place. Patricia sat there looking angrier by the minute. Finally, Barbara Collins suggested we take a break. David and I went to get coffee from the break room. They have nothing, David said quietly. No evidence, no legal standing, and honestly a pretty suspicious estimate from this drainage company. I am willing to bet Patricia's brother-in-law owns Summit Drainage or something. So what do? We tell them to pound sand. Pun intended. When we reconvened, David made our counter-offer. Mr. Irving will continue to use sand for winter traction as it is not prohibited by any properly enacted covenant. The HOA will rescind all fines and cease any further harassment regarding this matter. The HOA will be responsible for all normal drainage maintenance costs as those are part of their regular duties outlined in the covenants. Ronald looked at Patricia, who shook her head firmly. That is unacceptable. Mr. Irving needs to stop using sand. Why? David asked. Give me one legally defensible reason. Because it is damaging HOA property. Prove it. Show me evidence that sand, specifically from Mr. Irving's driveway, is causing damage beyond normal wear and tear. They could not. The mediation ended without a settlement. Barbara Collins said she would file a report indicating that the parties could not reach an agreement, which meant the next step would be court if either side wanted to pursue it. In the parking garage, David turned to me. They are going to come at you harder now. Patricia seems like the type who does not like to lose, but we are in a good position. Just keep documenting everything. He was right about Patricia coming at me harder. The next day, I received a notice that the HOA was calling an emergency meeting to discuss drainage system damage and assessment of repair costs to homeowners. The meeting was scheduled for the following week at the community center. I marked it on my calendar and sent an email to David asking if he could attend. He said he would clear his schedule. The community center was packed when I arrived. Apparently, every homeowner in Ridgeview Estates had gotten the notice and wanted to know why they might be facing a special assessment. I spotted Marcus and his wife Sarah sitting near the middle and joined them. This is insane, Marcus whispered. Did you see the email Patricia sent out? She is basically blaming you for everything. I had seen it. Patricia had sent a lengthy email to all residents explaining that, due to one homeowner's refusal to comply with environmental guidelines, the drainage system was damaged and might require a special assessment of up to $500 per household for repairs. The meeting started with Patricia at the podium, looking very official. She began with a presentation showing photos of the clogged storm drains. Then she brought up the estimate from Summit Drainage Solutions, projecting it on a screen for everyone to see. As you can see, she said gravely, we are looking at significant repair costs due to sand infiltration in our drainage system. The board has been in discussions with the homeowner responsible, but he has refused to cooperate. Who is the homeowner? Someone called out. Patricia pointed directly at me. Nathan Irving. He has been deliberately using sand instead of approved ice melt products despite repeated warnings. The room erupted in angry murmurs. I felt dozens of eyes turn toward me. My face burned with embarrassment and anger. I stood up. That is not the full story. Mr. Irving, this is not a time for discussion, Patricia said. Actually, it is, David Chen said, standing up beside me. I am Mr. Irving's attorney, and he has the right to respond to these accusations. Patricia looked flustered. This is an HOA meeting, not a courtroom. Under Robert's Rules of Order, which I believe your HOA follows, any member has the right to speak during discussion. I move that Mr. Irving be given 5 minutes to address the assembly. I second that, Marcus called out. Patricia had no choice but to allow it. I walked to the front of the room, my heart pounding. First of all, I said, I want everyone to know that I have not been deliberately causing problems. When the HOA implemented the eco-friendly ice melt requirement, I tried to comply. I went to multiple stores and found that the approved products cost 5 times more than traditional ice melt and did not work as well. So I found an alternative: sand. It is natural, it is cheap, and it provides excellent traction. But it is clogging our drains, someone shouted. Is it? I asked. Or is the drainage system clogged because we just had a massive nor'easter that dumped a ton of debris everywhere? Has anyone actually seen proof that sand is the primary cause of the clog? We have the drainage company's report, Patricia said. No, you have an estimate. An estimate from a company that I have never heard of, with no detailed explanation of what they actually found in the drains. For all we know, there is mostly leaves and sticks in there with a little bit of sand mixed in. I could see some people nodding. I pressed on. More importantly, the HOA never had the legal authority to ban traditional ice melt in the first place. According to our covenants, any new restrictions require a vote of the general membership. Did anyone here vote on the eco-friendly ice melt requirement? The room was silent. Then people started looking around at each other, shaking their heads. That is what I thought, I said. The board implemented a rule without proper authorization, threatened me with fines when I found a workaround, and now wants all of you to pay for drainage repairs that probably are not even necessary. This is ridiculous, Patricia sputtered. The board has the authority to make environmental decisions. David stood up again. Actually, Miss Hendricks, you do not. Section 9.3 of the covenants is very clear. Would you like me to read it to the assembly? Patricia's face was bright red. I move that we table this discussion until our next regular meeting when we have had time to gather more information. I second that, said another board member quickly. The motion passed, and the meeting ended in chaos. People crowded around me asking questions. Some were supportive, others angry. Marcus pulled me aside. Dude, you just made an enemy for life, he said. I know. But I am not paying $500 because Patricia made up a fake rule. Over the next few days, I started getting emails from other homeowners. Most were supportive, saying they were glad someone was finally standing up to the board. A few were hostile, blaming me for the potential assessment. One elderly couple, the Johnsons, sent me a particularly nasty message saying I was being selfish and should just comply with the rules like everyone else. But the most interesting email came from a woman named Deborah Martinez, who lived on the other side of the subdivision. She had been on the HOA board 2 years ago and had resigned after disagreements with Patricia. She asked if we could meet for coffee. We met at a Starbucks on Williston Road. Deborah was in her early 40s, a civil engineer who worked for the state. She ordered a latte and got right to the point. Patricia has been pulling this kind of thing for years, she said. When I was on the board, she tried to implement all these random rules without proper votes. I pushed back, and she made my life hell until I resigned. Why did not anyone else stop her? The other board members are either her friends or too intimidated to say anything. Plus, most homeowners do not pay attention to HOA stuff until it affects them personally. Patricia counts on that. What about the drainage company estimate? You think it is legitimate? Deborah pulled out her phone and showed me something. It was a business registration page from the Vermont Secretary of State website. Summit Drainage Solutions was registered 6 months ago. The owner is Mark Hendricks. Hendricks, as in related to Patricia, her brother. He was a plumber, but I guess he decided to expand into drainage work. Very convenient timing, do not you think? My stomach sank. So she is using HOA funds to pay her brother for unnecessary work. I cannot prove that, but it sure looks suspicious. If I were you, I would request a full accounting of HOA expenses for the past year, see if there are any other payments to Summit Drainage. I thanked Deborah and went home to email David Chen with this new information. He was very interested. If we can prove she is funneling HOA money to her brother's company, that is embezzlement, he said when I called him. We need to request those financial records immediately. David sent a formal request to the HOA management office demanding access to all financial records for the past 2 years, as permitted under the covenants. Patricia responded that the records were available for review by appointment only at the HOA office during normal business hours. I took another afternoon off work and went to the HOA office. Patricia was not there, but the receptionist, a young woman named Kelly, led me to a small room with a table and brought me 3 large binders. "These are the financial records you requested," she said. "You can review them here but cannot remove them from the office." I spent the next 4 hours going through every page. Most of it was boring stuff like landscaping contracts, insurance payments, and utility bills for the common areas. But then, I found what I was looking for. Summit Drainage Solutions appeared multiple times in the past 6 months. Small jobs at first, $100 here, $200 there. The descriptions were vague: drainage inspection, minor repair, preventative maintenance, but the amounts added up. In total, the HOA had paid Summit Drainage nearly $8,000 in 6 months. I took photos of every page showing payments to Summit Drainage, making sure to get clear shots of the dates, amounts, and descriptions. Then, I thanked Kelly and left. David was excited when I showed him the photos. "This is exactly what we needed. Now we need to figure out if this work was actually done and whether it was necessary." He hired a different drainage company, one with no connection to Patricia, to inspect the storm drains in Ridgeview Estates. The inspector spent a morning looking at all the drains and wrote up a detailed report. The findings were damning. Yes, there was some sand in the drains, but there was also a huge amount of other debris, including leaves, sticks, and road salt buildup. The inspector estimated it would cost maybe $2,000 to clean out all the drains, not $15,000. He also noted that the drains appeared to have been recently inspected and partially cleaned, which contradicted Summit Drainage's claim that they were severely clogged. "Someone has been cleaning these drains regularly," the inspector told David. "Probably within the last couple of weeks. They are nowhere near as clogged as your estimate suggests." Armed with this information, David sent another letter to the HOA. This one outlined all the evidence of financial impropriety, including the payments to Patricia's brother's company and the inflated repair estimate. He demanded that the HOA immediately cease all fine collection activities against me, rescind the eco-friendly ice melt requirement, and commission an independent audit of the HOA's finances. He also sent a copy of the letter to every homeowner in Ridgeview Estates. That letter was like dropping a bomb on the neighborhood. Within hours, my phone was blowing up with calls and texts from other residents. A group of homeowners organized an emergency meeting, independent of the HOA board, to discuss the situation. The meeting was held at Marcus's house because his finished basement was big enough to hold about 30 people. Almost every household sent at least one representative. The energy in the room was angry and electric. Marcus called the meeting to order. "Okay, everyone, I think we all know why we are here. We have got some serious questions about how the HOA is being run, and we need to figure out what to do about it." Deborah Martinez stood up. "I have been reviewing the financial records that Nathan photographed. In addition to the suspicious payments to Summit Drainage, I found several other irregularities. There are payments to a property management consulting company that I cannot find any record of. There are catering bills for board meetings that seem excessive. And there is a $5,000 payment listed as legal fees that I think needs explanation. The legal fees are probably for their attorney to fight Nathan, someone said. Maybe, but we should not be paying HOA legal fees to defend Patricia's personal vendetta. That is not what our dues are for. The discussion went on for over an hour. By the end, the group had decided to formally request a special meeting of the general membership to vote on removing the current board and installing new leadership. Under the covenants, this required a petition signed by at least 20% of homeowners. We got the signatures in 2 days. The special meeting was scheduled for January 15th. Patricia tried to fight it, claiming the petition was invalid because of some technical issue with the wording. But David Chen shut that down quickly by citing the relevant sections of Vermont HOA law. The meeting was held at the local high school cafeteria because the community center was not big enough. Over 200 people showed up, which I learned was almost 90% of the homeowners in Ridgeview Estates. I had never seen this kind of turnout for an HOA meeting. Patricia sat at a table in the front with the other board members, looking defiant. Ronald Stevens was there too, presumably to provide legal advice. The meeting started with a presentation by Deborah Martinez outlining all the financial irregularities. She had put together a detailed slideshow with copies of the questionable payments. When she got to the part about Summit Drainage being owned by Patricia's brother, there were audible gasps from the crowd. Patricia tried to defend herself. Summit Drainage was hired because they provided the lowest bid for the work. What other bids did you get? Deborah asked. Patricia faltered. Well, we got verbal estimates from several companies. Can you provide documentation of those estimates? I do not have them with me. Do they exist? Patricia did not answer. The vote to remove the board was overwhelming. Out of the homeowners present, only 12 voted against removal. Patricia and her allies were out. Immediately following the vote, there was a nomination and election process for new board members. Deborah Martinez was elected president. Marcus was elected vice president. 3 other homeowners I did not know well were elected to fill out the board. As the meeting was adjourning, Patricia stood up. This is not over. You people have no idea what you are doing. This HOA will fall apart without proper leadership. We will take our chances, Deborah said calmly. Patricia stormed out with Ronald Stevens following behind her. I thought that would be the end of it. Patricia was off the board. I could use sand on my driveway without harassment, and the HOA was getting a fresh start. But Patricia was not done causing trouble. 2 weeks later, I got a call from David Chen. We have a problem. Patricia has filed a lawsuit against you personally for property damage. What? How can she do that? She is claiming that your use of sand damaged the common area drainage system, and that as a homeowner, you are personally liable for the repairs. She is suing for $15,000. I sat down heavily. Can she actually do this? She can file the lawsuit, but I do not think she will win. We have the independent inspector's report showing the drains are not significantly damaged, but we will have to defend against it, which means more legal fees. I felt sick. I had already spent over $3,000 on attorney fees. Now I was looking at potentially thousands more because Patricia could not accept that she had lost. David must have sensed my distress. Look, I am confident we will win this. And when we do, we can ask the court to award attorney fees to you as the prevailing party. Vermont law allows that in frivolous lawsuits. The lawsuit dragged on for months. There were depositions, document requests, and endless back and forth between attorneys. Patricia's lawyer tried to argue that I had been deliberately malicious in my use of sand, knowing it would damage the drains. Our inspector testified that the amount of sand in the drains was minimal and consistent with normal runoff from multiple properties, not just mine. In April, we finally got our day in court. The hearing was held at the Chittenden County Superior Court in Burlington. Judge Harold Morrison presided. Patricia's attorney, a different lawyer than Ronald Stevens, presented her case first. He showed photos of the clogged drains and the estimate from Summit Drainage. He tried to argue that I had acted with willful disregard for HOA property. When David Cross examined Patricia, he tore her apart. He asked about her brother's company and why the HOA had paid them $8,000 in 6 months. He asked why she had tried to enforce a rule that was never properly voted on. He asked why the independent inspection showed dramatically different findings than her brother's estimate. Patricia struggled to answer. She got flustered and contradicted herself multiple times. At one point, she actually said, "I was just trying to do what was best for the community," which sounded more like an admission of overreach than a defense. Then David called Mark Hendricks, Patricia's brother, to testify. Mark was clearly uncomfortable being there. Under questioning, he admitted that Patricia had contacted him about starting a drainage business and had suggested there would be work available through the HOA. "Did your sister ever discuss with you the idea of creating drainage problems to justify more work?" David asked. "Objection." Patricia's attorney jumped up. "That is pure speculation." "Sustained," Judge Morrison said. "Mr. Chen, please rephrase." "Mr. Hendricks, did you and your sister ever discuss ways to increase the amount of drainage work the HOA would need?" Mark hesitated. "She might have mentioned that the drains were getting old and would need more maintenance." "When did she mention this?" "Around the time I was starting my business." "So your sister, who was president of the HOA, suggested that the HOA's drains would need work right when you were starting a drainage company. Did you find that convenient?" Objection. Overruled. The witness may answer. Mark looked miserable. "I mean, yeah, I guess it was good timing." The hearing lasted all day. By the end, Judge Morrison looked tired and annoyed. He said he would issue a written decision within 30 days. The decision came 4 weeks later. Judge Morrison ruled in my favor on every point. He found that I had not acted maliciously, that the sand was a reasonable winter safety measure, and that there was no evidence of significant damage to the drainage system caused by my actions. He dismissed Patricia's lawsuit with prejudice, meaning she could not refile it. But the best part was the last page of the decision. Judge Morrison wrote, "The court finds that this lawsuit was frivolous and brought primarily to harass the defendant for exercising his legal rights as a homeowner. The plaintiff is ordered to pay the defendant's reasonable attorney fees and costs." David called me as soon as the decision was posted. "We won everything, and she has to pay your legal fees. How much are we talking?" "I will put together a detailed fee request, but probably around $8,000. I could not believe it. Not only had I won, but Patricia was going to have to pay for my legal defense. But the story was not quite over yet. A week after the court decision, Deborah Martinez called me. "Nathan, you need to hear this. The new board commissioned a full forensic audit of the HOA's finances. The auditor found some very disturbing things." We met at a coffee shop, and Deborah showed me the audit report. It was worse than anyone had suspected. Over the past 3 years, Patricia had directed over $40,000 in HOA funds to companies owned by her family members and friends. Summit Drainage was just the tip of the iceberg. There was a landscaping company owned by her husband, a property management consulting firm owned by her cousin, and several other suspicious payments. "This is fraud," I said. "Yes, it is. The board is meeting tomorrow to decide whether to refer this to the police." The next evening, the new HOA board voted unanimously to file a criminal complaint with the Burlington Police Department. Detective Sarah Winters was assigned to the case. She was a financial crimes investigator with years of experience dealing with embezzlement and fraud. She spent weeks reviewing the audit report, interviewing board members, and collecting evidence. In June, Patricia Hendricks was arrested at her home and charged with multiple counts of theft by deception and embezzlement. Her brother Mark was charged as an accomplice. The local news covered the story, and it became a minor scandal in Burlington's suburban community. The criminal case moved through the system slowly. Patricia's attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecutor was not interested in being lenient. The evidence was overwhelming. In October, Patricia pleaded guilty to 3 counts of felony theft. She was sentenced to 2 years in prison, with all but 6 months suspended. She was also ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA, plus fines and court costs. Mark Hendricks pleaded guilty to 1 count of conspiracy and received probation plus restitution. By the time everything was resolved, it was early winter again. The first snow was falling as I stood in my driveway with a bag of sand, ready to spread it for traction. Marcus walked over from his house. "You know, you could use the eco-friendly stuff now. The HOA rescinded that stupid rule," I laughed. "Yeah, but sand works better and costs less. Plus, after everything I went through, I have kind of developed an attachment to it." The new HOA board had implemented a lot of changes. They had fired the old management company and brought in a new one with better oversight. They had established clear procedures for approving vendors and required competitive bids for any work over $500. And they had revised the covenants to clarify the process for implementing new rules, making it absolutely clear that major changes required a vote of the general membership. Deborah Martinez turned out to be an excellent HOA president. She actually listened to homeowners and worked to find reasonable solutions to problems instead of wielding power like a weapon. My legal bills were eventually paid by Patricia through the court order, though I heard she had to sell her house to cover all her debts. The HOA also recovered about $35,000 of the $40,000 that had been stolen, though some of it was gone forever. As for me, I learned some valuable lessons. I learned to read HOA documents carefully before buying a house. I learned that standing up to bullies is worth it, even when it is expensive and stressful. And I learned that sometimes the simple solution, like sand on a driveway, is better than the complicated one. That winter, several other homeowners in Ridgeview Estates started using sand instead of salt or ice melt. Nobody complained. The drains worked fine. I settled into a comfortable routine in my house. Work was going well, and I had gotten a promotion at the tech startup. I started dating someone I met at a coffee shop, and things were looking promising. Life was good. One Saturday morning in February, I was outside spreading sand on my driveway after a light snowfall when a car pulled up. A young couple got out and walked over to me. "Excuse me," the woman said. "We are thinking about buying a house in this neighborhood. Can I ask you about the HOA?" I leaned on my shovel and smiled. "Sure. What do you want to know? Is it pretty reasonable? We have heard horror stories about HOAs and we are a little nervous." I thought about how to answer that. "The HOA here is great now. Really reasonable board, clear rules, good financial oversight. But I will tell you what. Before you buy, make sure you read every single page of the covenant documents. Understand what you are agreeing to, And if anything seems off, ask questions. A lot of questions. That is good advice, the man said. Thanks. As they walked away, I went back to spreading sand. My driveway was safe, my house was mine, and the HOA was no longer run by someone who saw homeowners as subjects to be controlled. It had been a long, difficult fight, but it was worth it. Spring came and the snow melted. I swept up the sand from my driveway and saved it for next winter. The neighborhood looked beautiful with flowers blooming and green grass growing. Kids played in the yards and people walked their dogs in the evening. At the annual HOA meeting in May, Deborah presented the budget for the upcoming year. It was balanced and included a small decrease in dues because the new board had negotiated better contracts with vendors. There were no surprise assessments, no suspicious payments, and no arbitrary new rules. When the meeting opened up for questions, Mrs. Johnson, the elderly woman who had sent me that nasty email during the height of the conflict, raised her hand. "I just want to say," she said, "that I owe Nathan Irving an apology. I sent him a really mean message last year telling him he was selfish for fighting the board. But he was right and I was wrong. If he had not stood up to Patricia, we might still be getting robbed blind. So, Nathan, I am sorry. I was shocked. Thank you, Mrs. Johnson. I appreciate that." Several other people applauded, which made me embarrassed, but it felt good to be vindicated. After the meeting, Marcus and I went out for beers at a local bar in downtown Burlington. We sat outside on the patio, enjoying the warm weather. "You ever think about moving?" Marcus asked. After everything that happened, I considered it. Honestly, no. I mean, it was hell for a while, but this is my home. I like the house, I like most of the neighbors, and now the HOA is actually functional. Why would I leave? Fair enough. I am glad you stayed. Things would have been a lot worse if you had just given up. We clinked our beer glasses together and watched the sun set over Lake Champlain in the distance. The legal system had worked, even though it took longer than I would have liked. Patricia had faced consequences for her actions. The HOA had been reformed and was now serving its actual purpose, maintaining common areas and protecting property values without overreaching into people's lives. As I drove home that night, I thought about how close I had come to just giving in. It would have been easier to buy the expensive, eco-friendly ice melt, to pay the fines, to accept Patricia's arbitrary rules. But I would have been enabling a corrupt system and allowing myself to be bullied in my own home. Sometimes standing up for yourself is messy and expensive. Sometimes you have to hire lawyers and spend months fighting battles that seem ridiculous on the surface. But it matters. Because if good people do not push back against petty tyrants, the petty tyrants win. The next winter came around, and I was ready with my stockpile of sand. The first significant snowfall hit in early December, and I was out there at 6 in the morning spreading sand on my driveway before heading to work. As I worked, I saw other neighbors doing the same thing. Mr. Wagner with his sand. The young family 3 houses down with their sand. Even Mrs. Johnson was putting sand on her walkway. Patricia's eco-friendly ice melt requirement had been dead for over a year, but the irony was that many people had switched to more environmentally conscious products anyway once they were not being forced to. Choice made all the difference. People do not like being told what to do, especially in their own homes, but they will make good decisions when given the freedom to choose. The drains worked fine all winter. The streets stayed safe. Nobody complained about sand or ice melt or anything else. The HOA quietly did its job maintaining the common areas, and life went on. In March, I got an email from Deborah Martinez. The Vermont Homeowners Association, a statewide advocacy group, wanted to interview me for an article about HOA reform. They had heard about the situation in Ridgeview Estates and thought it was a good example of how homeowners could successfully challenge HOA overreach. I agreed to the interview, which was conducted over the phone by a reporter named James Killian. He asked me detailed questions about the timeline of events, the legal strategies we used, and what advice I would give other homeowners facing similar situations. The most important thing, I told him, is to know your rights. Read your covenant documents. Understand what the HOA can and cannot do, and if they overstep their authority, do not be afraid to push back. You are not being difficult or unreasonable by insisting that rules be followed. That is just basic accountability. The article was published in April and got a surprising amount of attention. I received emails from homeowners all over Vermont, and even some from other states dealing with similar issues. I tried to respond to as many as I could, offering whatever advice or encouragement I could provide. One email was particularly memorable. It was from a man in Massachusetts who had been fighting his HOA over solar panels. His HOA claimed solar panels were not aesthetically pleasing and violated their architectural guidelines. He had been about to give up until he read the article about my situation. "Your story gave me hope that I could win this fight," he wrote. "I hired a lawyer and we found out that Massachusetts has a solar rights law that prohibits HOAs from banning solar panels. We are going to court next month. Thank you for showing me that standing up to the HOA is possible." I wrote back wishing him luck. It felt good to know that my stubborn refusal to stop using sand had somehow inspired other people to fight for their rights. As spring turned to summer, life in Ridgeview Estates settled into a pleasant rhythm. The HOA organized a neighborhood barbecue in June, which was actually well attended and enjoyable. There was no drama, no surprise announcements of new rules, just neighbors getting together and having a good time. I brought burgers to grill and spent the afternoon chatting with people I had only waved to in passing before. It was nice to be part of a community instead of constantly battling with it. Patricia's house, which had been up for sale since the previous fall, finally sold in July. A nice family with 2 kids moved in. When I saw them outside unpacking boxes, I walked over to introduce myself and welcome them to the neighborhood. "Hope you like it here," I said. "It is a good place with good people," and it was true. Without Patricia's toxic influence, Ridgeview Estates had become what an HOA community should be: a place where neighbors looked out for each other and worked together to maintain property values while respecting individual rights. Sometimes I still thought about those early morning confrontations with Patricia on my doorstep, her clipboard clutched in her hand and that fake smile plastered on her face. I thought about the stress of the mediation and the lawsuit, the hours spent in my lawyer's office, the uncertainty of not knowing how everything would turn out. But I also thought about the satisfaction of winning, of proving that one person can make a difference, and of helping to reform a broken system. Those memories made all the stress worthwhile. As autumn arrived and the leaves began to turn brilliant shades of red and orange, I prepared for another Vermont winter. I bought my sand early this year, stocking up with 20 bags stored neatly in my garage. When the first snow flew, I would be ready. And when I spread that sand on my driveway, I would do it with a smile, knowing that I had fought for my right to do exactly that and won. Sometimes the small battles matter most. Sometimes refusing to back down over something as simple as sand can expose corruption, bring about reform, and remind everyone involved that homeowners have rights that cannot be trampled by petty bureaucrats with clipboards. Winter came again, as it always does in Vermont, and my driveway was safe and accessible all season long. The sand worked perfectly, just as it had before. The neighborhood thrived under its new leadership, and I lived peacefully in my home, free from the arbitrary harassment of an HOA president who had forgotten that her job was to serve the community, not rule it. That is how a 50-pound bag of sand that cost $5 ended up costing Patricia Hendricks her freedom, her reputation, and about $40,000 in restitution. All because she could not stand the idea of a homeowner making his own reasonable choices about winter maintenance. The story became something of a legend in Burlington's HOA communities. When people had disputes with their boards, they would sometimes reach out to me for advice. I always told them the same thing: know your rights, document everything, and do not be afraid to fight back when you are in the right. Years later, when I eventually decided to sell my house and move to a different part of Vermont for a job opportunity, I made sure to tell the new buyers about the HOA's history. I wanted them to understand that vigilance was important, that HOAs could go bad if residents were not paying attention, but also that good people working together could fix things. The sand stayed in the garage for the new owners. They were welcome to use it or not, as they saw fit. That was the beauty of freedom. That was what I had fought for. The simple right to make reasonable choices about my own property without interference from petty tyrants with clipboards. And in the end, that was worth every penny, every hour in court, every moment of stress and uncertainty. Because some principles matter more than convenience. Some fights are worth having, even when they seem absurd on the surface. And sometimes, standing your ground over something as simple as sand can change everything for the better.